rising up of good trouble, as John Lewis would say, to say, not in my country, this is unacceptable.
Will the senator yield for a question?
To Senator Dick Durbin, somebody who's been my mentor and friend, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you. I first want to acknowledge this extraordinary moment in the history of the Senate. I believe you have been holding the floor now for more than 10 hours, and perhaps we'll go on it even longer. And you've been joined by your colleague and friend, Senator Murphy of Connecticut. And I'm sorry to take the early morning shift, but I didn't want to miss this moment in history, not just for the historic nature of it, but for the substance of it as well. I just remind my colleague and fellow member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, it was only 3, maybe 4 weeks ago that we had witnesses before the Judiciary Committee, and I asked a question, and one of them is pending on the calendar, the executive calendar on the floor. His name is Dean Sauer of Missouri, and he's seeking the position of Solicitor General of the United States. Along with him was the lady aspiring to be the Assistant Deputy Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, and Aaron Reitz, who has been approved by the Senate for a legal policy position. And the questioning went to the basics of our Constitution, which you have noted here today, and that is, what is the check and balance on a president? What is the accountability of a president under the Constitution? As I read it, and I don't profess to be expert, I'm still learning, as I read it, the accountability of the president is in Article 2, and Article 3, Article 3, the judiciary. Ultimately, the president can be held accountable by impeachment in Congress or by decision of court that some of the orders that he is promulgating are inconsistent with law and the Constitution. And the question that was asked of the witnesses who are seeking positions in the Department of Justice, can a public official defy a court order? It seems so fundamental and basic. The answer is no, of course, but these 3 witnesses all equivocated in their own ways, which raises a question: if this president is not held accountable by a court order, what then can control a president who misuses their office to the detriment of the nation or the people who live here? And that, I thought, was a fundamental question. It was interesting to note, you may remember, that one of our Republican colleagues on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, after hearing these witnesses equivocate on whether a public official can defy a court order, came to the committee and basically said, "What are you saying?" The answer is obvious. You can criticize a decision of the court within the bounds of propriety as a member of the bar. You can appeal a decision of the court, but if that doesn't satisfy you, your recourse is to quit, resign, leave. The Constitution has the last word. The courts have the last word. And I think that's a question that you're raising today. Where is the accountability of the President of the United States when he misuses the power of office? In the cases that you've mentioned, the Alien Enemies Act, it's a law that's been around since, I think, 1807 or somewhere that time. I think it's clear, unless you have declared a war or unless you are invaded, you cannot invoke the Alien Enemies Act as this president has done. And he's being challenged in that regard. Yesterday, our friend, Senator Grassley, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, and I say friend, some people back home say, don't say that anymore. We don't talk to those people. They're wrong. This is a body where we do talk to one another, and we should, for good reason. Well, he raised the question yesterday, why is President Trump being challenged so often in court? Well, he has issued 102 executive orders. I don't know if that's a record, but I'll bet it is. 102 executive orders. questioning something as basic as birthright sovereignty, birthright citizenship. And so the point that I'm getting to is, in obvious situations here where President Trump has gone too far, where is the accountability? It's not going to be an impeachment. We're realists. We know that the Republican House of Representatives is not likely to ever consider that. It could be in the courts. And if it goes to the courts, the question is, will this president follow a court order if it goes against his policy? And if he won't follow that court order, where is the accountability? Where is the check and balance? Where is the constitutional framework, which is supposed to be at the foundation of this democracy? I think you're raising important questions. In the Insurrection Act, the use of our military for political purposes is a frightening prospect. It's something we have avoided throughout our history and should continue to. And I just commend you for raising this point because I believe it's timely. It's as timely as the questions that we asked of these Department of Justice nominees about the enforceability of court orders. And the question is now, will the American people speak up? I'm counting on some of our Republican friends to speak up too. Throughout history, there have been moments when the party other than the president's party showed extreme courage, political courage, and spoke up. We need that kind of voice now. I thank you for raising that on the floor this morning. My question to you is, at this moment in time, as we ask these nominees whether they would follow a court order or defy a court order, doesn't that get to the basics of our constitutional democracy?
Yes, it does. I mean, you put forth this litany that where we have to ask ourselves is, at what point do my colleagues in the House or the Senate and the Republican Party say, enough? God bless John Kennedy for calling out the absolute absurd. I was in that hearing where you have nominees for some of the highest positions in the administration failing to say that they will abide by a court order. I mean, that is something we haven't heard people on either side of nominees just say so bluntly now. Not, yes, I will follow the orders of a court. They're equivocating. And God bless one of my colleagues, John Kennedy, who said, that's absurd. You either obey the order or you resign. Because we have a constitution. And so when is it enough? When is it enough? This is the month of Passover, and there's a wonderful song I love singing when I'm at a Pesach, the Dayenu. It would have been enough, is the song, if God just delivered us from Egypt. It would have been enough if he parted the seas. It would have been enough. Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. This is a kind of a twisted version of that. When is it enough? When the President of the United States starts a meme coin on his first day, violating the emoluments clause immediately and enriching himself. When is it enough? When he takes an agency that is on the front lines of stopping infectious diseases like Ebola or tuberculosis-resistant, drug-resistant tuberculosis from coming here. Is that enough? When we created that in Congress and he has no right to stop that agency, would that have been enough? When is it enough for him to issue executive orders that trample on the highest ideals of this land? When he mocks members of the court so badly that even the current Chief Justice admonishes him? When is it enough? When Elon Musk is indiscriminately firing people and then realizing, oops, we need the FAA safety folks. Oops, we need the nuclear folks who are helping us keep our regulation. When is it enough that you will say, okay, I'll call them in and have a hearing to create some transparency in what he's doing? When is it enough when he activates the Alien Enemies Acts and starts disappearing human beings without due process? When is it enough? Well, it's enough for me. It's enough for me. 12 hours now I'm standing and I'm still going strong because this president is wrong. And he's violating principles that we hold dear and principles in this document that are so clear and plain. The powers of the Article 1 branch are spelled out and he is violating them. Don't take my word for it. Republican appointed judges, Democrat appointed judges are saying it and stopping him, and then he maligns the judge that did that. When is it enough for people to speak out and not just fall in line, to put patriotism over a person that's in the White House? So to your question, sir, to my friend, and I'm sorry to get a little animated at this early morning hour, but I am so frustrated. And not just because of that, but I'm reading the stories. We're going into the next section, which is national security, and I'm reading the stories of our citizens of this country. Not just New Jerseyans. Yeah, there's a lot we've read in these 12 hours, but there are people from all over the country are reaching out to my office, and I know they are yours. You're the second highest ranking Democrat in here. I know they're reaching out to you because you're a man that stands for justice. I know they reach out to your office too because you're one of these outposts for sanity in a Congress that is being too complicit to an executive that is overstepping his authority and violating the Constitution and hurting people who rely on health care and Social Security. I'm reading these stories, sir, because the voices of the Americans that don't have the privilege that the 100 of us don't get to stand here, but I believe the power of the people is greater than the people in power. That's the ideals of our democracy and our Constitution. So I'm rip-roaring and ready. I'm wide awake. I'm going to stand here for as many hours as I can, 12 hours, and I recognize that my other friend, another person I consider more than a friend, like a sister to me, from the state of New York, my neighbor.
Senator Booker, would you yield for a question?
My sister, for you, I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Senator Booker, I've been listening to this debate all night, and I got to say, you're on fire. And you're on fire because the American people are very, very angry about what is happening. They are not happy with what this administration has done. It's contrary to what was promised. It's contrary to what was expected. And I know we're going to talk about national security in a few minutes, but can I ask a question about one of the topics you talked about last night? Because it was exactly what my constituents were talking to me about yesterday. So I was in New York yesterday, and we talked about these cuts to Social Security. I have to say, I was stopped by the gentleman who worked at Amtrak and said, Madam Senator, I just want to thank you for protecting my Social Security. That has never happened to me before. Never happened at Amtrak to be stopped by someone who worked there to thank me for one thing I had done that day. But I'm telling you, Senator Booker, when Elon Musk starts firing people at Social Security and tells the Social Security Administration, you cannot answer the phone, what are our mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers supposed to do? Many of them are not readily available to be on a computer. Many of them can't ask their question online. And worse, Elon Musk is expecting them to show up in person at a Social Security office. How many of our older Americans are not able to drive anymore or are uncomfortable driving? How many of our older Americans feel uncomfortable getting in the subway to get to a Social Security Administration because there's stairs or because the lighting's not good enough? These are the challenges that our older Americans have. And so I just want to talk about the things you told us last night about the risk to Social Security. Social Security is our seniors' money. It's not the government's money. It's their money. So what happens when you make it hard for a senior to call and make sure their check's on the way, or their check never showed up and they can't find it? For a lot of older Americans, that Social Security check is the only money they have for that month. It pays for food, right? It pays for heating bills. It pays for their medicine. It pays for their rent. It pays for everything they need to survive. And Elon Musk's office doesn't believe anybody should be answering the phones. Who is he to tell America how to run its Social Security Administration when our seniors need those checks? They've crippled the phone service, even though, get this one, can't answer the phone, crippled the phone service. You can only make an appointment on the phone. So how are you supposed to make an appointment if you are going to go in? I mean, that's absurd. They plan to cut 7,000 staff. That's a lot of staff. 7,000 staff, even though the Social Security Administration staffing is already at a 50-year low. So they are lying when they are saying this is about efficiency. They just want the money. And what do they want the money for? Tax cuts for billionaire buddies of Elon Musk. It is an obscenity. It is an absurdity. It is an outrage. And everyone in America should be concerned. Hands off our Social Security, Elon Musk and President Trump. Hands off. They are rallying all across the country to say hands off my Social Security, hands off my Medicare, hands off my Medicaid. It's an outrage, and I don't think people should stand for it. Because your Social Security check is your hard-earned money. It is not for Elon Musk to play with, to shift around, or send it to tax breaks for his billionaire friends. Now, I have to say, my office has been working closely with one senior. Now, she's a New Yorker with a disability, and she was told that she had to call a specific representative's extension by the end of March. Well, that was yesterday. And if she didn't get this person, her application could be denied. She's called every day, sometimes more than once a day. She has been on hold for 4 to 5 hours just to reach this representative. As of yesterday, when we reached out to her, she had still not reached the representative. So Americans across the country are panicked. They are stressed. They are worried that they won't get their hard-earned money back, their retirement, to pay for the things that they need. Now, this is the money they've spent their entire careers paying into. You know, every time you get a paycheck, Senator Booker, there's a line that says Social Security because that money's been taken out of your paycheck and put into Social Security, so it's there for you when you retire. It's your retirement. The page is sitting here right here. You are paying into your Social Security. Now imagine this is your first paycheck, isn't it? I bet it is your first paycheck. Your first paycheck, you're putting in dollars that, you know, are you want saved so that when you can't even imagine what it's going to be like to be 65. But the day you're working here, the fact that you spent all night here supporting Senator Booker, that's your retirement. Wouldn't you be pissed off if Elon Musk took your retirement money? You should be. He doesn't have any right to it. And what he's doing is he's doing it by cutting staff. So if you need help because your Social Security didn't arrive, then how are you supposed to get that check? They can't issue you a new one unless they know that it didn't show up in the mail like it's supposed to. Ultimately, cutting individuals from Social Security doesn't just affect them, it affects the entire economy. So you can imagine if all our seniors are getting this Social Security benefit, you can't go then buy your groceries. You're not going to be able to then go buy whatever you need for your home. Those stores will get less money, and that means there'll be less resources in the economy. Social Security, if you didn't know it, it's our country's largest anti-poverty program. It keeps people out of poverty. That's what it does. When we designed Social Security, however many decades ago, it was so that our seniors don't die in poverty, because they were dying. About half of seniors at that time were dying in poverty. They didn't have enough food to live. And so we created Social Security. It's one of the most popular programs. It's one of the most effective programs. So reducing access to this key program, Senator Booker, is an outrage. It's harmful, it's cruel, it's hurtful. So I know that this is something that you've really spent a lot of time on last night, but don't you think it's cruel to not allow phone service? Don't you think it's wrong to make it harder for people to get access to their hard-earned money? Don't you think this is something that America did not sign up for in this election?
I read last night, thank you for the question, my friend. I read last night some of the most painful letters of people over and over again from throughout my state and through other states who are living in fear, who use words like terrified and told stories that they couldn't sleep because of the rhetoric of this president, the rhetoric of Elon Musk calling it a Ponzi scheme, telling lies during a joint address. And then I read stories from people that work in Social Security. They're telling about not having desks and the waiting lines and the inefficiencies that this has created and the horrible, deteriorating customer service. Yeah. And I've been trying as much as I can during this last 12 hours to read the stories of Republicans.
Yeah, this affects everyone.
Yes. To read editorials from the Wall Street Journal to just show that this isn't a partisan thing. This isn't about left or right. It's about right or wrong. It's about, will we as a country honor our commitments that we made? And then I read independent folks that are saying this is crazy, that this program is even in jeopardy.
I have another question for you, because I know you want to move on to some national security issues this morning.
I will yield for a question while retaining the floor.
Thank you, Senator Booker. So the other thing that stressed out my constituents that I talked to about this weekend is air safety. They're very, very stressed out about these cuts to the FAA. You know, there was a plane crash not too far from here, helicopter crash. Everyone on that helicopter perished. We've been reading about stories across the country about flight safety and the fact that there are near collisions all the time. We had a horrible crash in New York, in Buffalo, the Colgan Air crash. I've gotten to know the families over the last several years because they've worked together for legislation to make sure we have pilot safety. But what I've been watching in terms of this administration is they don't seem to care. They just have made up this idea that cuts across the board are necessary to get rid of fraud and waste in the budget. And I agree, we can make government more efficient, but the way you do that is at least learn what each of these agencies do, study what's happening in them and how to make them more efficient. Make sure the right number of personnel are hired. Make sure the right training is offered. Make sure there's no wasteful programs. That's good government. That is not what Elon Musk and his Doge boys are doing. That is nothing like what they are doing. They're just cutting everything because they want to make space for these tax cuts for their billionaire buddies. It's really disgraceful. It's something that I don't quite understand. So over the past 2 months, just the past two months, we've seen horrifying accidents and near misses at airports all across the country. And there was another close call just this past Friday, again at DCA. Many of these accidents have been a result of chronic understaffing and antiquated technologies at the FAA. But instead of fixing those problems, the first thing the Trump administration did when it came to power was fire people. I think he's kind of stuck in the loop of The Apprentice. You're fired, you're fired, you're fired. I don't get it. Like, good government is important, and I support efficiency. That's not what they're doing. It's like they're on a power trip, and they just want to fire everybody across the board. Just fire them all. So while a court forced the FAA to rehire workers, thank God for the courts. Thank God for the judges that are doing their jobs and looking at these lawsuits appropriately. Many federal workers have simply moved on and found new jobs because these are highly skilled, highly sought after employees, people that we really want working in the federal government to keep our country safe. Now, just weeks after the horrific plane crash here with 67 people getting killed in Washington, the administration fired hundreds of Federal Aviation Administration employees, jeopardizing the public safety and threatening our national security. So that made no sense. Like, it was right on the heels of some horrific accident that we all witnessed. Now, over 90% of U.S. airport terminal towers don't have enough air traffic controllers. Critical shortages remain for other aviation safety personnel as well. such as safety inspectors and mechanics, because to make sure when we get on that plane, the plane's ready to go. In New York, nearly 40% of positions are unfilled at 2 facilities on Long Island that direct air traffic for Newark, our shared airport, JFK, and LaGuardia. As a result, over these past few years, the U.S. has experienced a substantial and alarming increase in the number of near misses. According to an analysis from the New York Times, in 2023, close calls involving commercial airlines occurred on average multiple times each week. And a number of significant air traffic control lapses increased 65% over the previous year. What did they cite as the major reason behind the increase? A shortage of air traffic controllers. While the Trump administration claims no air traffic controllers or critical safety personnel were fired, we know that many of those who were let go played an essential role in maintaining our air traffic control infrastructure. Others were responsible for maintaining navigational, landing, and radar systems. We also know that safety inspectors, systems specialists, maintenance mechanics are among workers who are affected, and at least one of the employees fired worked for FAA's National Defense Program, which protects our airspace from enemy drones, missiles, aircraft, and used as weapons. I want to talk about those missiles and drones as well. I really want to talk to you about what your thinking is here, that we don't have a plan. You had the incursions in New Jersey, incursions in New York at the same time, and we don't have assurance that those drones aren't being operated by China or Russia or Iran or another adversary for a nefarious purpose. We have to get to the bottom of this, and that's something that, Senator Booker, you and I have been at the forefront on when questioning the administration about what they're doing on this issue. So the question I have is, why did the administration fire these workers and so easily part with them? Who will perform these duties going forward? What risk analysis was performed to ensure this won't make flying less safe? Now, I asked these questions of the Secretary of Transportation in a letter on February 20th, over a month ago. And what was their response? We don't know. They haven't answered my letter. They're not willing to engage the Senate in actually policy and decisions that keep our states safe. What's worse is that we don't know if this is where it ends, or if more reductions are coming, and more reductions that allow for safety for our FAA. Now, DOGE's so-called workforce optimization initiative, it's BS. They don't do the analysis first. They just make the cuts. We need the Secretary and the acting FAA administrator to be responsive to Congress's questions and oversight. The American people deserve to have a federal aviation agency that is dedicated to actually doing the job of protecting us, protecting this country. The Trump administration needs to take immediate steps to address FAA staffing shortages across the entire agency, not just air traffic controllers. So, Senator Booker, the question I really want to ask you is, for your state, for New Jerseyans, what are they thinking? Like, how do they receive this information? What do they say when they read about drone incursions over one of your arsenals, over one of your sensitive military bases? What do they think about cutting staff to the FAA when they watch all this information about crashes? I know my constituents are pretty stressed out about it. They don't understand why someone's making these cuts. Again, the why is the most important question. It's not for efficiency. It's not to get rid of the fat. It's not to get rid of the fraud. Never heard an allegation there's fraud in the FAA. Never heard an allegation there's fat in the FAA. They've been understaffed forever. So they're lying about the purpose. So what is the purpose? What is the purpose? What are they going to do with that money, Senator Booker? I'd like to know.
So I appreciate this more than you know, and there's a line threaded throughout your entire question about the way they're going about doing this. from so many agencies. First, they're trying to kill certain agencies, the Department of Education, which they can't legally do. The USAID, they can't legally do. We created that. It's the Article I branch of government. But on some of these other agencies, like Social Security, where you started, we know it's ready, fire, aim, and actually the aim part never happens. They're savagely cutting personnel, and organization after organization, seniors, thousands of them, are already writing in about the undermining of service. The Wall Street Journal article we read last night said that the customer service at Social Security is going from bad to worse, and painted horrific pictures that are putting seniors in crisis. Not to mention the closing of Social Security centers in rural areas where people have to now drive hours and hours and hours. And so the FAA, it was one of the early outrages that they hired people that they then realized they needed and tried to find some way to pull some of them back. And you and I both know that the way they talk about government workers, a large percentage of them are our veterans, the way they demean and degrade them, the way they accuse them of being parts of corruption, fraud, or fat, when the stories we've been reading of what some of these folks do is extraordinary. And so your question, though, brings up a lot of national security issues. I'm going to bridge to that because you and I both were really, really incensed that we weren't getting enough information when we had these incursions. And I want to start what I've been doing in other sections. It's just reading, elevating on this floor the voices of people from our country, trying to elevate more of the voices to let people know we see you, we hear you, your outrage, your hurt, your fears. They have value.
I have another question before you start your letters, Senator Booker, if you'd like to entertain another question, if you'll yield.
I will yield a question while retaining the floor.
Okay. So, because you're going into the national security section, and I want to give you a couple of questions to pepper your answers, because I sit on the Special Committee on Intelligence in the Senate. I also sit on the Armed Services Committee. And so national security is an area where New Yorkers care a deep amount about. And I've been spending the last 15 years focused on how we keep this country safe and what we should be doing. And so I get a lot of questions from New Yorkers about this issue. So I want you to address the drone issue for sure, because that is something you and I have been working on continuously since we've seen these incursions. And just to give a little more context for New Yorkers who might be listening to this debate, we've had drone incursions over sensitive military sites for quite some time now. And it's something that I've been working on a bipartisan basis through the Intelligence Committee. And some of these incursions are every night, over and over again, over sensitive military bases. There was one over Langley. We've had them over arsenals in New Jersey, over sensitive sites in New York. We've had them over military bases across the country. And, you know, I don't like it when the answer is, oh, we know where most of this is. This is mostly FAA traffic. And I don't like it when I hear it from this administration or any administration, because it's not true. Some of the drone sightings are planes in the air, helicopters, you know, maybe weather balloons, maybe enthusiasts, but they do not know if all are. And in these specific incursions, they do not know the origin of them. They do not know whose they are. They do not know who is operating them. They do not know the purpose of these drones. These drones could easily be spying. They could be planning attacks. They could be doing anything nefarious. We have no basis to say it is all known and we are not concerned. And so this is something we are going to get to the bottom of. I am very incensed about it. It does not leave our personnel as safe and does not leave our secrets safe. So drones is one issue. The second issue, if you could address on the national security side, is cybersecurity. I think that, and election security, one of the cuts that the Doge boys made, which I literally cannot understand why they would ever do this. This is making us weaker. It is making us less safe. It is not good for America. And it shows how ill-advised this process is and how uninformed this process is and how we can see through these cuts how insincere this process is. This is not about waste. This is not about fraud. This is not about good government. This is about making massive cuts for tax breaks for billionaires because that is where they want to spend your tax dollars. New Yorkers' tax dollars and New Jerseyans' tax dollars. They want to take it and give it to tax breaks to the billionaires. Okay, so this is the question. These cuts, they have cut all the personnel or the main personnel at an organization called CISA that were supposed to be doing election security. So the people who actually were working with the states to make sure our election system can't be hacked, they fired those people. They fired the senior personnel at the Department of Defense, our most experienced generals, across the board, members from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, just fired them. For what reason? I don't know. No substantive reason was ever given. But these are the senior personnel who actually keep us from wars, who have the judgment and the experience to advise the president, to advise Congress, to advise us on how to keep us safe. And then the last group they cut were the lawyers. Do you remember that Shakespeare play, The First Thing We Do is Kill All the Lawyers? Well, the context in which that was given was in order to have a coup. So Shakespeare, hundreds of years ago, said, if you want to have a coup, the first thing you do is kill all the lawyers. Well, they fired all the lawyers, the senior lawyers at the Department of Defense. They fired the generals who actually know how to keep us safe. And then they fired the personnel at CISA who are responsible for election interference. They fired the people at the FBI who are also responsible for election interference. So again, these firings make no sense. I don't think they're making us I don't think they're making us more safe. I think they are making us less safe. When you fire the people who know what they're doing and are dedicated to keeping us safe, doesn't make us safer. What do you think, Senator Booker, about any of the topics that I raised, specifically the drones, the firing of the election protection personnel at CISA, the firing of the generals, the firing of the senior lawyers at the Department of Defense, firing of the FBI personnel, also expert at election interfering? These are the smartest, most capable, the most sophisticated senior personnel that are there to help us keep this country safe. I really want to hear what you're hearing for your state and what you're thinking about this reckless approach to national security.
I'm so grateful for the questions from my colleague, from my friend. I want folks to know that probably the best dinner I had when I came here was with the senator from New York, who really gave me a quick rundown on how to get things done in this body. I've watched her work on both sides of the aisle relentlessly to get things over the finish line, to help people in our region, from 9/11 folks who were our first responders, to get their health care, to fight, to support the military, empower the military, but to fight against sexual assault in the military. She is one of these phenomenal people. And a lot of her questions we're going to get to, including that question that was obviously painful about national security, is that, like, hey, one of the strategies of Russia, we know this, is to attack elections of other democracies, to try to sow discord, to try to undermine the very voting process. And the Trump administration pulled away a lot of the people in the DOJ and elsewhere that their sole purpose was to fight against foreign election interference. And so how can we have a nation where the president that's in charge of national security is not doing things to address the issues that were in your questions? And I want to start by reading a couple constituent letters. I know we want to step back and talk a little bit about immigration because my colleague and my friend and my partner in leadership in the Senate, Tina Smith, is here. But I want to get into some of these letters because I said over 12 hours ago that we were going to continue to elevate the voices of people out there. And so this is coming from someone from New Jersey. And they're writing, "Dear Senator Booker, I'm writing to express my deep concern regarding the current state of our nation and the lack of response to the looming constitutional crisis. It is becoming increasingly difficult to ignore the actions of a president who routinely lies and makes outrageous proposals such as annexing Greenland, Mexico, and Panama, or even renaming the Gulf of Mexico. Those proposals not only undermine our international standing, but also disrespect the foundations of our country. Furthermore, I'm alarmed by the growing threat to press freedom. Recently, for example, the Associated Press was barred from the White House press room simply for referring to the Gulf of Mexico rather than the Gulf of America, a clear sign that the president's disregard for free speech and free press's role in holding power to account. The president is actively trampling on the Constitution and blatantly ignoring the rule of law, as Senator Gillibrand was saying. He has taken steps to slash vital federal agencies and disaster relief programs, undermining our nation's capacity to respond to crises. His decision to appoint unqualified individuals to high positions for the purpose of following his will is another example of how our democratic systems are being systematically weakened. Additionally, his reckless and irresponsible approach to foreign policy is making the world more dangerous. His insistence on blaming Ukraine for Russia's invasion and ongoing war is not only historically inaccurate, but also deeply damaging to our allies and global stability. Even worse, his administration has entertained so-called, in quotes, peace settlements that exclude Ukraine from the process entirely, effectively allowing Russia to dictate terms without any Ukrainian input. Such actions betray our commitments to sovereignty and democracy and embolden authoritarian regimes worldwide. Domestically, his agenda is destructive. His administration has pursued the withdrawal from USAID, the gutting of critical global humanitarian and development efforts that have long served U.S. interests abroad. At home, he is enabling tech billionaires like Elon Musk to take a chainsaw to government agencies, arbitrarily dismantling institutions that provide essential public services. His attacks on the NIH and its funding jeopardize critical medical research and public health initiatives, undermining scientific progress for purely ideological reasons. Beyond these threats, his treatment of our closest allies is both reckless and embarrassing. His taunting of Canada, whether through inflammatory rhetoric or deliberate policy snubs, weakens our diplomatic ties and disregards the importance of maintaining strong relationships with our neighbors. This petty, short-sighted approach to international relations is isolating the U.S. at a time when global cooperation is more critical than ever. My greatest frustration, however, is the lack of action from our representatives and governors. Too many are cowering in fear of the president's authoritarian tactics. I am troubled by the absence of pushback. We are witnessing the erosion of checks and balances, and the consequences could be dire. I was heartened by Governor Janet Mills of Maine standing up to the president's orders. Unfortunately, his response was a threat to her political future, further evidence of the intimidation tactics being employed. I implore you, Senator Booker, to show some moral courage and take meaningful action to stand up to this growing threat to our democracy. Please let me know how you are responding to this situation and what steps you, Senator Booker, are taking to defend our Constitution and the rule of law. Thank you for your time, and I look forward from hearing from you soon. I hope at this early morning hour at almost 8 o'clock that maybe you are listening, because I hear you, I see you, and I'm standing here because, in part, of letters like yours. This is not normal. These are not normal times. We must begin to do as John Lewis says, get in good trouble, get in necessary trouble. I want to read another constituent. I just want to see where this person's from. I'm not trying to violate the privacy as my staff doesn't want me to do. What's that? We know Wisconsin's getting a lot of love here. I know my colleague, I kept seeing folks from two towns in one in your state and one in the great state of Pennsylvania. But this person, alas, is from Jersey. I wrote to ask you to do all you can to resolve funding for the National Institute of Health and USAID. I work in information technology at Princeton University, and I've seen firsthand the destructive termination of funds is causing to research and education. We are losing the momentum of research and causing deep and lasting loss of educational resources. The NIH and the National Science Foundation provide funds for basic research as well as applied topics. The benefits of this research will be long-lasting, and the cost of disruption will be very high. Similarly, the disruption of USAID is tragic. My daughter works for an organization working with USAID on climate mitigation and adaptation. She has lost job security as a result of the Trump administration's actions. Work she has built on in Ethiopia, Kenya, and elsewhere will be disrupted due to lack of funding. Thank you for your leadership as our senator. I am proud to be represented by you as well as our new senator, Andy Kim. The promise of our country is great, but we must redefine our purpose and imagine a new future. Your experience and knowledge will be critical to our country's success. Let me go with two more and then turn to my colleague. This is a short one. I am writing to express my concerns about the chaos and lawlessness coming out of the White House. USAID must be restored. Please use powers to restore democracy to the United States of America. This is not what democracy looks like. Thank you. Somebody from New Jersey. And one more voice. As a parent of a USAID Foreign Service officer recently in Ukraine, now in Kenya, I am outraged and horrified by the coup now being staged by Elon Musk under the authority from the president. To be called criminal after putting your life at risk in the service of America's interest is itself to be a victim of criminal-like behavior. I have seen the beautiful roads and railroads in Africa built by Chinese. In one fell swoop, Trump has given that continent to the Chinese and the Russians. He did the same thing years ago by canceling participation in the Pacific Free Trade Pact, forfeiting our power and our goodwill, making China the largest player in the region. I saw the goodwill in the eyes of passersby from the Philippines to Georgia to Tajikistan. Now I hear it turned to hostility. Think of sports fans in Canada booing our national anthem. Think also of the infants that will now die from AIDS because of USAID's treatment program was abruptly stopped, along with vaccination programs and programs for stopping diseases such as Ebola, monkeypox, hemorrhagic fever. These diseases will come home. With even a 90-day pause in workers in these programs, we will lose jobs and rent, and some never will return. Refrigeration of medicines will be at risk. Clinics and offices will become unavailable. Humpty Dumpty will not be quickly put back together again. Some of what Trump wants to do will ultimately need approval of Congress. I urge you to fight every one of his proposals and appointments. Slow the legislative process as much as you can. Please. I hope Trump will lose his majority. Thank you for your attention. I will be of service in any way possible to right these wrongs. I love when constituents don't only point out what's wrong, but stand up and say, I will be in service. Let me know how I can help. Your voice is helping tonight. Speaking to these issues is helping tonight.